Товарищи, рабочая крестьянская революция, о необходимости которой все время говорили большевики, совершилась!
Although the stimulating memories of that happy time of past are both marred and embittered for us by the shameful fact that when victory was won, be it remembered, chiefly by the indomitable spirit and ungrudging sacrifices of our own intolerant soldiers. We turned our backs on our associates, refused to bear any responsible part in the administration of peace.
I want to say that the settlement of the Czechoslovakian problem, which has now been achieved, is, in my view, only the prelude to a larger settlement in which all Europe may find peace. This morning, I heard another talk of the German Chancellor, Herr Hitler. Here is the paper. There's his name upon it. Any other questions that may concern our two countries, and we are determined to continue our efforts to remove possible sources of difference, thus to contribute to assure the peace of Europe.
The government says that we must rearm, but there's no safety in great arms. Mr. Baldwin has said, the bomber will always get through. His colleague, Lord Londonderry, is close to having prevented air disarmament. It's suggested by some people that those who oppose the government is not Catholics. The true Catholics are those who would build up the strength.
I am speaking to you in the Cabinet Room at 10 Downing Street. This morning, the British ambassador in Berlin handed the German government a final note, stating that unless we heard from them by 11 o'clock, that they were prepared at once to withdraw their troops from Poland, a state of war would exist between us. I have to tell you now that no such undertaking has been received, and that consequently this country is at war with Germany.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. The American people in their righteous might will win through to absolute victory.
Is Victory in Europe Day. Tomorrow will also be Victory in Europe Day. But let us not forget for a moment the toils and efforts that lie ahead. Japan, with all her treachery and greed, remains unsubdued. The injuries she has inflicted upon Great Britain, the United States and other countries, and her detestable cruelties,
a message from the
call for
Japanese
justice
government
and retribution.
in reply to the message forwarded
We
to
must
that
now
government
devote all
by
our
the Secretary
strength
of
and
State on
resources
August 11th.
to the completion of our
I
task.
deem this
both
reply
at
a
home
full
and
acceptance
abroad.
of the Potsdam Declaration,
Advance Britannia.
which
Long
specifies
live
the
the cause
unconditional
of freedom.
surrender of
God
Japan.
save the King.
In the reply, there is no
Товарищи,
qualification.
соотечественники и
Arrangements are now
соотечественники,
being made for the formal signing of the
наступил
surrender terms
великий день
at
победы
the
над
earliest
Германией.
possible moment. General
Фашистская
Douglas
Германия,
MacArthur has
поставленная
been
на
appointed
колени Красной
Supreme
Армии
Allied
и
Commander
войсками наших
to
союзников,
receive the Japanese surrender.
признала себя побежденной и
Russia
объявила
and China will be
безоговорочную капитуляцию.
represented by high-ranking officers. Meantime,
7 мая
the Allied armed
был
forces have
подписан
been
в городе
ordered to
Реймсе
suspend offensive action.
предварительный протокол
The
капитуляции.
proclamation of VJ Day must
8
await
мая
upon the formal signing of the surrender terms by Japan.
в присутствии представителей Верховного командования союзных войск и Верховного главнокомандования советских войск подписали в Берлине окончательный акт капитуляции.
It is clear that however much the world may spend on making this organization effective, it will be a very small sum compared to the terrible cost of war. War has become more and more devastating. But, sir, even if we had not discovered the atomic bomb, bacteriological warfare, and all these other terrible devices, still it was our duty to outlaw war and to create and make effective this organization.
Le rassemblement du peuple français qui, dans le cadre des lois, va promouvoir et faire triompher l'immense effort du salut commun et la réforme profonde de l'État. Il est temps que dans cet accord des actes et des volontés, la République française, de noyautage en noyautage sous une certaine dictature,
I just want to leave this as a parting word, because when you go back home, I want you to please help us. I want you to keep that picture before you, always in your hearts, that the poor, unfortunate men, women, and children who have done so much for us to help win this war, that we owe to them, and we must keep the faith that we will never stop until we have done everything within our power to see that these poor, unfortunate people get every aid that's possible for man to give to them. I thank you.
After lengthy consideration over many months, to submit my resignation as Secretary General of the United Nations. The United Nations has drawn back aggression in Korea. There can be an armistice if the Soviet Union, the Chinese People's Republic, and the North Koreans are sincere in their wish to end the fighting.
Mohammad Mossadegh, Premier of Iran, meets the press to reaffirm his government's unwillingness to arbitrate with Britain over nationalizing the Anglo-Iranian oil company.
The Suez Crisis burst dramatically into the news again, for Israel has invaded Egypt. Britain and France have declared the canal in danger, and British and French troops are on the move. Background to these startling events is the running sword of the Israel-Egypt frontier, which has been a theater of sporadic warfare ever since the Israeli state came into being.
We cannot allow, could not allow, a conflict in the Middle East to spread. Our survival as a nation depends on oil, and nearly 3/4 of our oil comes from their partners. As a Labour Member of Parliament, speaking in support of the government, put it, to be without oil is to see our industries grind to a standstill and starvation overtake the people.
Because first and foremost, we are American citizens. And we are determined to acquire our citizenship to the fullness of its meaning. We are here also because of our love for democracy, because of our deep-seated belief that democracy transformed from thin paper to thick action is the greatest form of government on earth.
Today have concluded an agreement to end the war and bring peace with honor in Vietnam.
Now I want to talk to you about the world in which America finds itself in the post-Cold War period. We have really achieved everything we set out to do. But George Bernard Shaw once said, there are two tragedies in life. One, that you fail to achieve your heart's desire. And the second tragedy is that you achieve your heart's desire.
I must tell the House that the Falkland Islands and their dependencies remain British territory. No aggression and no invasion can alter that simple fact. It is a government's objective to see that the islands are freed from occupation and are returned to British administration at the earliest possible moment.
The proposition of equality, it's a humanistic proposition. All men are equal. Plainly patently ridiculous.
Did you admire him? Very much. He had so much to say. I mean, he was so interesting.
The howl of another air raid siren brings Tehran to a virtual standstill.
For the first time, the differences between East and West, fundamental differences over important moral questions dealing with the worth of the individual and whether governments shall control people or people control governments, have shown signs of easing.
Earlier he said they wanted Iraq just to stay as it was. Now they're talking of stripping Iraq of its power. But our people and our armed forces are determined to continue this struggle, he said.
Rwanda, where if we'd gone in sooner, I believe we could have saved at least a third of the lives that were lost. Remember, they died in a hurry.
My fellow citizens, at this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger.
Mr. Speaker, I've never put the justification for action as regime change. We have to act within the terms set out in Resolution 1441, that is our legal base. But it is the reason why I say frankly that if we do act, we should do so with a clear conscience and a strong heart.
Difficulties are in the nature of human coexistence. The differences that there would be are not necessarily the differences which would excite fear and horror, unless someone stands up and says that fear and horror are an appropriate response. Someone invested with the authority of public office. When you do that, the charisma of your office and the charisma of your role as a politician will often convince people that fear and horror are an appropriate response if that is what is being told to them.
If you believe that, you will believe anything. It is stark nonsense to say that if I had never been born, the same dangers and problems would have existed in this country.
No, I didn't say that either.
Well, you did indeed.
No, I did not. I did not say
I've made it easier for you.
No, you haven't at all. I did not say that the same dangers would not exist. I did not say that ethnic frictions don't exist between groups that are drawn from different areas and that have different racial origins. Social cooperation is a hard and a difficult thing. And I deplore your techniques.
A tenth priority must be a reset for the 21st century. Our governance of global commerce, not just public health, but also peace and the natural environment, needs to be reinforced and reimagined.
Мною принято решение о проведении специальной военной операции.
that idea of and think of it, that was a bygone age where it was all about finding out how they breached the rules.
For this,
now there's no shame.
Which is the result
all
of
you need to do is instill fear and be willing to hurt people,
which has given up
and you
on
can
morality,
get whatever you want.
And simply
the only
pursues
true
popularity
power
at
is
all
violence.
I'd like for them to be asked more often than they are. If your advice had been taken over the last 15 or so years, Slobodan Milosevic would still be, well, he might have died, but before he died he might well have become the dictator not just of Serbia, but of a cleansed and ruined Bosnia and of Kosovo. Saddam Hussein would still be the owner of Kuwait as well as Iraq. He'd have nearly doubled his holding of the world's oil, and he would have not been impeded in his pursuit of a nuclear weapon. If your policy of non-intervention had been followed, face it, that would have followed too. The Taliban would still be in charge of Afghanistan. Don't you feel a little reproach to your so-called high-principled anti-war policy? Would that really have led to less violence, less cruelty?
This world is such a, and when I say this world, I mean it. I don't mean in an ideal sense. I mean in every day, every little thing you do. It's such a, gimme, gimme, gimme. Everybody back off. You know, everybody's like, you taught that from school, everywhere. Big business. If you want to be successful, you want to be like Trump, gimme, 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 push, 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 push. Step, 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 crush, crush, crush.
For that decision today, I accept full responsibility. Without exception and without excuse.
We are literally being walked all over by foreign criminals, and we're too useless and too gutless to do anything about it whatsoever. And until we leave the European Convention on Human Rights, get it out of British law, leave that ludicrous foreign court, we will have criminals from all over the world making a total mockery of this country.
We start in the United States, where Donald Trump has denounced the International Criminal Court, accusing it of illegitimate and baseless actions against the US and Israel.
Iran's foreign minister denied that the US strikes had caused a major blow and accused the US of breaking international law.
Thousands of people have taken to the streets of towns and cities across England in counter demonstrations against a wave of riots by anti-immigration protesters.
The tech billionaire Elon Musk has been interviewing the co-leader of Germany's AfD party, Alice Weidel. The interview went live a short time ago on the X social media platform.
People would see the language of racial division as contributing to a climate where violent acts flourish.
It is true that there are still isolationists in the United States, and I find that there are isolationists of a sort in Britain too. There are isolationists in Europe, and I am sure that in the Soviet Union also we would find isolationists. Now that victory has come, there has been the inevitable letdown, the days of discouragement for both our countries.
We've come to a period in history when mankind must either set up an institution of this kind and not only set it up, but make it work, or face consequences so appalling that the mind shrinks even from contemplating them. Atomic energy has been liberated, and that fact makes war merely a form of suicide for mankind.